Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We're excited to present our next session on blending cities and cultures, where we will hear insights around promoting cultural vibrancy in cities, particularly the role of creative ecosystems and clusters. We're going to hear about the factors which are essential to promoting a healthy environment that enables local creative sectors to flourish, as well as a depiction of what the ideal state entails. Moderating this exciting session is Belize Tejirle, Sustainability and ESG Advisor at Aramco and Senior Fellow for the Global Cultural Districts Network. Joining her on the panel are Dr. Barbara Romer, founder of Studio Romer, Tita Lاراساتي, Deputy of Strategic Partnerships of the Indonesia Creative Cities Network. Joining virtually is Stephen Hobbs, Johannesburg-based artist and urbanist, Vilma Jarcuti, El Secal Executive Director, and also joining virtually is Alessandro Melis, IDC Endowed Chair Professor at New York Institute of Technology. Please give them a warm round of applause.
Thank you. Well, we have a fantastic panel for you all today, and we'll be exploring this session topic as they'll be sharing their insights and experiences within the context that they work in, and giving us insights into promoting cultural vibrancy in cities. So I'm going to dive right in with an opening question to our panel to really help us begin to understand the essential factors for cities, creative industry and economy. Starting with you, Dr. Barbara. What are the must-haves for any city that wants to drive a growth agenda for cultural creative sectors?
I would say it's crucial to have authenticity. I think we talk so much about global cities that we're starting to be in cities where they're all the same, you forget where you are. And I think we need to refocus and say we need to talk about local cities with global appeal, so that is what we're ultimately communicating, to be authentic to the place. We're all using the same architects, the same artists and so on. We need to anchor into the homes where we are and listen to the people who live there in the communities and invite them to be part of the creation.
Tita?
Yeah, in this case of our experience working with hundreds of cities in Indonesia, we urge each city actually to map their 2V and 2Ps. 2V is the vision and values, and 2P is the personality and positioning compared to the other cities, and that's where they get their potentials.
I think I would second some of or echo maybe some of your voices. I think first of all, maybe we need to dislocate and go beyond this creative economy vocabulary and liberate arts and culture from economic logic. Focus on economies of repair, because that addiction to growth has gotten us to the planetary crisis and anthropocenic world that we live in today. And perhaps that's the biggest step that we need to make. We need to go from a wholesale thinking into whole thinking structures. And I think that's really key in terms of rethinking measures of success. So it's not really only economic, it's social and environmental impact that I think we need to demand from all cities, governments, to look at that spectrum as kind of part of your performance, not only economic. So that would be kind of my take.
And Stephen, who's joining us virtually.
Hi everybody. I think sitting well south of all of yourselves and looking at the circumstances, economic, political and social in South Africa at this point in time, and then our urban centres, I think more and more as we have seen Johannesburg aspire to a world-class African city and respond to kind of public-facing, large-scale sort of cultural positioning, if you will, I'm actually much more interested in coming back to, I suppose, some of the point that Vilma was referring, this idea of economies of repair. And for me, in our current work, particularly in the last few years, it feels to me like it's deep listening, looking at strategies around very, very strategic reconnecting with the mechanisms, the infrastructure, and the people that are willing and interested in a participatory dialogue around perhaps a kind of reconstruction around something that is authentically specific to the context, to the place of Johannesburg or places thereof, but that can also resonate on a global level, of course.
Alessandro?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Well, I think that the key word in times of global crisis is creativity, and this must be intended as a means to change paradigms from scratch. We are thinking today of architecture that is a part of the city as something which is static, and we are going to 400 years, perhaps 1,000 years. The idea of this stability of governmental condition in a given geographical context prevail. We now realize that the world, the atmosphere, the reality that surrounds us is neither static nor progressive. Instead, it is very fluctuating and dominated by physical and chemical components of the atmosphere. And the living also and the inanimate agents that characterize the biosphere are also part of this world of diversity. So we have to consider each of these subjects as part of a context and as an active role. Because from now on, however, not changing means only the worst. And I think education has a key role here, because knowledge transfer in this period of time is less relevant than ever. Stimulating creativity is more important. Focus on methodology, innovation, and research, especially multidisciplinary research, is key to understand what are the paradigms that will define the city of the future.
Thank you. So having laid the context, I'm going to pose some questions to each of you to really bring out some of the ideas you just mentioned. Dr. Barbara, throughout your career, you've worked across a variety of different facets of the creative industries. You've curated museums in France and Japan, directed theatre in Germany, produced feature films in the US, and consult on developing cultural visions for cities globally. If you can tell us a little about how that has benefited you as an individual creative, especially when approaching projects to promote cultural vibrancy in cities.
Yeah, I've always been personally fascinated by arts and commerce, and so I came out of college and I worked at a not-for-profit modern art museum in Tokyo at the same time as at Christie's, the auction house. And the director of Christie's and I had a kind of heart-to-heart, and he said, you know what I did before Christie's? I worked for Mitsubishi. I was a car salesman, and you know it's the same job. And it blew my mind. I was very young, and that was really revelatory for me. I then worked in a medieval art museum in France, where I realized the curators weren't the ones who decided what got bought. It was the board, it was the money. So after my PhD in art history, I went to McKinsey & Company, and I was a generalist. I worked from everything stock exchange to companies. And so I've always been intrigued and so lately especially obsessed with the intangibles of arts and culture, and you know, our sense of wellness that it brings, and how can we as a community express that in financial terms. And so I've always loved all the different skills and trying to weave them together in the service of storytelling for empathy. And that is really what I want my life to be about. And from every different aspect, I'm finding little wisdom pearls and trying to integrate them and use them for that greater mean.
And I want to hone in on wellness. In one of the earlier sessions, you listed top 10 rules for creative placemaking, and one of those rules was about designing to enable the well-being of people living in urban places. Based on your global and diverse experience, what does cultural vibrancy actually bring to the well-being of a city's people, and how do you design for and engage and align public and private organizations in that reality?
I think it very simply brings happiness or understanding or meaning, right? I always talk about culture as being the soul of livability. And so when I think in this region about art, I think about walkability, right? There's a very sad movement that everybody's sitting in cars. There's a new pandemic of obesity. So how can we actually use art and sculpture and the strategic placement in urban planning to get people to walk, to enjoy their walk, to just want to go the next block to see what it is. So I think using arts and culture to inspire people, to invite them to explore their own communities in a different way is very, very key.
Tita, you have been deeply involved in constructing creative policies in Indonesia. You serve as Deputy of Strategic Partnerships for the Indonesia Creative Cities Network. You are a focal point for UNESCO's creative economy-related initiatives in Bandung City. You are also active on several committees that promote Indonesia's creative economy. Based on these experiences, how important are government policies for shaping the creative sector within your context, and how replicable are your approaches for other global cities?
Right. It works both ways actually, because if you mention government, and their role is actually providing policies and regulations, but then in the context of creative economy, which is relatively new, they still have to grab in many places what a creative economy is. So in a way, we are preparing prototypes and examples of what they can actually put their hands on as governments. So we've been with communities as initiatives, we've been building prototypes and see how it works, and we then map how the government can play part in it. So in a way, it's a skill of say communication with the government, because bureaucracy and those languages are not actually community languages. It needs a kind of bridge. So that's why we are proposing the importance of intermediary, a group of people who can touch base with the grassroots people, aspirations of the common creative economy actors, but then also with government, with their languages of laws and bureaucracy and so on. So the experience actually has not been too long. It started about 2006, 2008, and then we now there's the latest example is that we insisted to have creative economy as a strategy of development by composing, they call it academic script, as a base to make a draft, legal draft for regulation. And we did that in Bandung, so we gathered universities and experts and so on. And we helped, and we asked the help of one of the departments in the city municipality to propose this as a legislation. And we got it passed in January 2021. So in a way, through this bill, we are preparing 8 subjects that the government can provide facilities if we want to have creative economy and creative industries thrives in Bandung. But also, it has been an example for other cities as well.
And at the outset, Vilma touched on a more holistic approach to understanding creative economies, for example, environmental protection, climate change. Tita, I know you're also active in the climate space and serve as climate leader for the Climate Reality Project in Indonesia. In your perspective, how can creative sectors promote environmental sustainability given the imperatives related to climate change and its relevance to a city's residents?
Well, the best is through examples, because my position as a lecturer and researcher also in the oldest university in Bandung, in Indonesia actually, Engineering University, there's a class about this. So this Faculty of Art and Design, we have designers, crafters, artists to be, and before they graduate from this school, they have to pass my class, which is, we call it environmental and arts and all. And in this class is their opportunity to work together to show how they can use their creative potentials to make, say, interventions or examples or whatever else they can think about to encourage this climate awareness and so on. Contextually, from the grassroots again up to the actors. So there are examples that then we use them also as prototypes to show the government to make policies according to relating to creativity and climate and environmental. So that's one way through university and to students.
Vilma, Al Sarkar Avenue has been pivotal in bringing cultural vibrancy to Dubai and the wider region. In your tenure as director, you've been responsible and instrumental in the district's expansion and evolution to house now more than 60 of the most prominent contemporary art galleries, makers, and homegrown creative spaces, to provide cultural consulting to private and government clients via Al Sarkar Advisory, and more recently to fund and promote art via Al Sarkar Arts Foundation. Looking back on this journey, how do you ensure that the role of Al Sarkar within Dubai's cultural space and creative sector is sustained over the long term?
I mean, when we began, the West didn't really know what to do with us as a Sarkar, because we are grounded in plurality as an institution. So we live in the form of a neighborhood, in the form of a community of pioneers in arts and culture, in architecture, in design, in film, etc. But then we also are a foundation that is committed to artistic production, research, and scholarship. And finally, we now live in the form of an advisory where we are able to share some of our knowledge with key partners regionally and globally. And I think it started with this logic that we are not seeking correctness or validity from the West. And I think it's really important for emerging models and kind of dislocating some of those hierarchies and the way we think about different cities in different parts of the world, that we should be learning from Indonesia, we should be learning from the Emirates, from Saudi and other parts of the world, and not only from London and New York, and so forth. And so we never viewed ourselves synonymous with the built environment. We view ourselves as a process, as a continuum, and I think that's really key when you think about longevity or sustenance. And how can you adapt to changing times? Because, a colleague touched on COVID. It's not post-COVID. We live in a world with COVID. And these changes will keep on occurring on the planetary terms. And so I think for us that was always key. How do we stay connected with the community? How we don't live in isolation? And how we allow this process to unfold and adapt and readapt again to mold its own space.
And talking about adaptability in the COVID period, I am going to touch on that subject, given it's so relevant. And again, thinking along the lines of enabling sustainability, how has the creative ecosystem in Dubai, but also globally, because I know you serve as on the advisory board of a global cultural districts network and engage with other cultural districts around the world, how the creative economy needs, how have they shifted post-pandemic and what's changed?
I mean, it was really a moment of global paralysis and continuous remaking that all cultural institutions, governments, private or public sector had to undergo. It goes without saying that, again, we understood this commodified nature of arts and culture and where we are situated at that point. And what I witnessed, starting with Al Sarkar, but also colleagues in Chicago and Montreal from Global Cultural Districts Network, who really responded beyond a cultural definition. So closing your doors as a museum or an institution was not good enough. We were faced with humanitarian crisis. We had to respond to the communities nearby. And so in Al Sarkar, we launched a program, Pay It Forward, where our luxury restaurants became community kitchens, where artists donated work to raise funds to help the neighborhoods around us. And I think that kind of outlook and response, and similarly, I think Navy Pier in Chicago, they actually opened their doors with, we partnered with Red Cross for blood donations. Hotel in Montreal converted to be a space for the homeless. So looking after those communities and not just saying as an institution or art museum, that's what we are here to do, I think was key. And going forward, that remodeling must reoccur. So there will be more polymorphous re-specialization, I would think, cross-sector collaboration that we will witness, and again, that focus on economies of repair. I mean, rethinking our impact in creative economy and beyond. And resilience stems from community, just what Barbara mentioned earlier. And I think we constantly need to ask, are we always, you touched upon placemaking, but when are we place breaking? Are we still making cities? We need to ask critical questions about our work and practice as we begin to remodel and rethink some of our, with sustenance in mind, some of our frameworks and methodologies that we still apply.
And along those lines, Stephen, you have a particular interest in the impact of urban planning and architecture on the behavioral aspects of the city and society. Could you tell us more about what prompted your interest in using creative spaces and economies as a positive force in Johannesburg and subsequently beyond?
Well, I think it's important to reflect on the sort of on the post-apartheid condition around the 90s, where in a way towards the end of the 90s, our cultural the infrastructure to support the cultural economy had really collapsed in many respects. So there's been a rebuilding process, both in terms of a formal market and in terms of a kind of more entrepreneurial, independent artist spirit that we see emerging in urban centres around South Africa that are responsive to their interventions and the like. And there are plenty of examples of kind of culture-led urban regeneration where the artists are the vanguard of that move, and then slowly but surely capital follows, gentrification, and then the artists are pushed out. So I wear two hats, I have been for the last 25 years. I'm a practicing artist, and I'm a director and owner of the artist collective, the Trinity Session, where we have consulted extensively with through the city of Johannesburg on large-scale public art programs, and more recently in the last 5 years, creative placemaking projects. And I think that the business of what attracts one to those spaces is it's about a particular kind of energy and consciousness of presence of mind and the toolkit available to see the public realm and cultural institutions evolve as the city evolves, particularly in this post-apartheid context that I've referred to previously. So I've had the privilege in a way of being present and working in several of these kinds of environments, starting with the Newtown Cultural Precinct in the 90s, where I was the curator of the Market Theatre Gallery. And I think that actually set the tone for a lot of the kind of critical awareness that the two-hatted person in me is concerned about. The one is, what is the particular journey of a creative person, an artist, who's looking for to be recognized both professionally but also accommodated for their freedoms, to be not confined by a strict market. So that's on the one hand. And then on the other hand, wanting to respond to the city's interpretation of what an artistic community's needs might be. And often from a top-down experience that one has over the years, the people making those decisions are not necessarily as closely engaged with the lived experience or the physical built environment experience of creative practices. So I think that in our particular case, myself and my co-director Marcus Newstetter and our greater team, through collectivity, we've looked at working in the city through our kind of artistic logics and methodologies to garner a greater sense of connectivity with people and networks, which in turn informs us about the placeness of places or the sexiness of sexy places, and then to understand how we might be able to influence the decision making in those environments, be it through the kind of immediate stakeholder buy-in of a particular district that has ambitions to be recognized culturally and therefore attract broader audiences and the like, or to city who has a particular agenda around competing both internationally, globally, or locally, city to city. So I find that the need in this kind of work is is compounded and intensified through the need being problem solving through a multidisciplinary sensibility where we extend way beyond our defined sense of artistic practice and start to open up our vocabularies to other practitioners, be they sociologists, scientists, anthropologists, architects, urban designers, and one can go down the line, school teachers, and so forth, and start to reimagine the configurations of the voices at the table that are instrumental in the change-making process. That's where my head sits on that question for the moment.
And we do have an architect with us, Alessandro. Just picking up on Stephen's points there, how easy is it to truly blend cities and cultures? And what are the key factors and decisions behind making this a practical reality?
Well, it's not easy, but I mean, blending, it's not an easy thing that we can do, but I'm convinced, I believe that the blending of culture is an enormous reservoir of possibility for overcoming global crisis. One of the reasons why cities have failed, my opinion, is that they are cities, they represent cities as a limitation. Because it is a structure that when we think about city today, it's predominantly imagined by a middle-aged Western man, let's say. So the diversity of culture is the tool to increase the creativity potential, which is of course needed to challenge the obsolete paradigm of cities. In a way, what I'm trying to say is that the city must be more just and inclusive, not only because these are things that we consider ethically correct, but because it is necessary from an architectural perspective as an evolutionary possibility. This also means that it is difficult today to describe the city of the future because it will imply still today the idea of, let's say, the architect as a guru who is able to advise future cities according to his own perspective. So we need to focus more on the process in this term. So in practical terms, we need to deal with more complexity. We have not been able to embrace complexity until now. We have preferred order and authority, and this is the result. Now we need, let's say, cities which are less ordered. I mean, using the taxonomy of the current architecture. When I say order, I mean something that we consider order today. I don't mean that the city must not be organized. What we don't need is a Puritan city, because the disorder is needed to build new relationships and association. This process, of course, imply also non-deterministic processes, which are, by the way, called creativity. So the key aspects of the city in the future to overcome crisis will be necessary variability and redundancy and diversity. And this will lead, of course, to more radical cities, high-density city, design possibly in a world where cultural and social borders will not exist anymore. And the result of this, as a consequence, it seems indirect, but of course there is not much time to articulate why. These cities will be cities with no waste. Waste does not exist in nature and shouldn't exist in the cities. The only reason why it exists is a misconception of the idea of artificiality and of idea of economy. An economical system that is built in today's cities which doesn't assign cost negative impact. So I hope that next generation of architects maybe will be able to imagine more intrinsically ecological architecture and cities that can be, let's say, more cultivated and built. Cities that will be more able to feed communities rather than be fed by communities.
May I suggest something? So the one thing I've been really intrigued by is, in my experience, especially it didn't strike me as powerfully until over recent years, was just in urban planning, and I'm incredibly male heavy. And it struck me when we were in a group and we're planning a playground. It was in a lot of rooms where master planning is happening. It is incredibly male heavy. And it struck me when we were in a group and we're planning a playground. It was 20. And there are no women in this room. How is this possible? And understand maybe they aren't yet equally represented in these jobs, but then let's have focus groups. And so I actually researched it in the University of Stockholm, just looked into it, and 80% of their spaces are designed for boys. And when they found out and they asked girls what they want from a playground, they said, I want a sheltered environment. I don't want the boys to see me. I want to have a place where I can look into somebody's eyes and speak. Right? And so I think we're not just thinking about architecture, but planning overall and making sure we're really planning our cities of the future to be inclusive and diverse and have all the voices at the table, even if it's not through professional capacities, but to be a part of it.
Thank you, Dr. Barbara. So in closing, and having explored the session from your different perspectives, I'm going to revisit the question at the beginning, but pose it a little differently. What would you say are the top 3 absolute musts for a city's creative ecosystem to thrive? If I may begin with you.
Okay. I think, so authenticity, which I touched upon. I do think tolerance, right? I mean, like Richard Florida said, technology, talent, and tolerance. I think it is absolutely crucial that we are open and tolerant for creativity to flourish. And I think the other thing we can't underestimate is we need to foster recognition of the intangible value of the cultural creative industries. And we all have to help ourselves. We know what's happening when there's a successful creative place. You walk through it, like when I see Rafiq Anadol's work, my heartbeat slows down and I smile, right? But there's no cost of it. But what might happen is that I will move to that neighborhood because I know that's the feeling of well-being that I'm sensing. So I think we need to figure out how can we put this in numbers. I think when Christo did the gates in Central Park under Michael Bloomberg, he was very smart to make that an economic study, right? And it was shown that usually during the same time, 750,000 people would come to the park. Now 4 million people came. Local business reported an increase of revenue of 200%.
Because I live in the city. And the second thing is empathy in a way that you should know who you are in your city and you should know your position, and everybody has a role there. It's unwritten maybe, but then you know what your role is there. And the third one is actually an enactment of if a city already has a lot of community initiatives and so on, it will just be like sporadic spark here and there. But if you make it worthy, and if you want to make it more solid, then you can either put it in a bill, or in universities you can have regular, for example, conferences and so on. And you should always have these takeaways to build it up to the next step. So you don't have just the same conference one after another again. But for example, like this event now, it should have a takeaway that we should be able to give to the next step. That's for me.
And Vilma, and I'm going to ask slightly shorter answers because we're getting close on the...
Well, I think I'll try to be short, although I think that's part of the problem. This kind of bullet points and short-termism does not allow us to deal with problems in a complex way. And I think that complexity needs to find a place in governance, and I don't mean just government, governance, which means we're all part of that. And that can manifest through municipal diplomacy and other aspects. I think secondly is obviously, I think data terminology and logic will not work anymore. I think there is too much policy transfer, policy imitation that is ill-fitted for some cities, for some geographies, for some environments. So we have to go back to reshaping and remolding those models that are context-specific, that consider climate change that we are globally faced with. So ways that we need to change the way we do things. And allowing for that incompleteness and for negotiation for these terminologies, I think is really key. So for us to allow for these places to come to life and these communities to thrive, we have to be thinking about environmental justice. We have to be thinking about the global commons, digital commons, in order to create models that are equitable with sustenance in mind. I think these are really key parameters as we kind of look forward that are required from all stakeholders, so we can continue. So if we view this as something that's under construction, we can constantly be prepared and, you know, stop thinking of culture or cities as a built environment. It's the circuits that form the city, the invisible circuits, the people, not the streets, not the bridges, not just the buildings. And I think that departure is something that we just need to connect the two. It's not one or the other. It's not, I'm not thinking in extremes or contrast, but to connect the two, I think is really, really key. And we need to design those cities with that invisible aspect in mind. That's how I would see it.
And Stephen?
Okay, I'm going to try and keep this really short. I think just to pick up actually on Barbara's point earlier, we've been working very, very closely with children from a child-led or child-centered design approach to thinking about public space and the like. So two terms or two phrases, I suppose, that sit within the response to the question would be, and this is something that really concerns me around audience development and design development, is intergenerationality around the table, and perhaps a transgenerational sensibility in all the work, because this speaks across the spectrum of audience for me. And then in connection to that is a finer understanding of scale and the scalability in relation to, perhaps on the one hand, the homogeneity of a public, but then to the specificity of that scale, meeting the needs and responding to and being open to that audience or public's potential to contribute to and enhance that as co-producers, co-authors, and so forth.
Alessandro.
Well, I think the key words here, but let's say in a way, are summarizing what also everybody else has already said, that diversity is definitely one of the key elements that we have to consider. I would like to extend this also to non-humans' presence in the city. So we are talking about the diversity that goes beyond also the idea of diversity that we consider today the minimum acceptable. The second term is probably variability, intended as the kind of flexibility that allow us to deal with complexity. We cannot think in binary ways as we have done until now. We need to deal with complexity in all the way. And the redundancy is probably a third term that, from my perspective, is important, because the redundancy is the characteristic of all creative structures, and in the case of cities, it could be also a redundancy of function. It's not acceptable anymore that we have buildings for one use, piece of city for one use only. It's not economical. Nature doesn't operate like this. Nature operates always in economy with multi-functionality and multiple functional cooptation. And then last thing that I would like to add is that community resilience is more important because too often as architects we deal too much maybe with the idea of less abstract structure, but we need to be a little bit less abstract. Community is the minimum unit of social cohesion and it's the scope. The city is just a means.
And just to pick up on that, you curated the Italian pavilion for the Venice Architecture Biennale, which focused on resilient communities. What were the messages around that, and how could architecture contribute to enabling cultural resilience for urban communities?
Well, we started from the idea that architecture intended as a strategic perspective on construction in cities as a huge responsibility in environmental crisis. Probably is one, if not the first, is one of the first causes of environmental crisis. So we started from the idea that the status quo is not an option. The goal of the project, the Resilient Community, was the exploration of intrinsically ecological forms of architecture and the measurement of their impact in terms of benefits for community, especially regarding health and social pressure. The aspect that, let's say, we have considered as more important is the evolutionary biology as a heuristic value to understand what architecture can be in the future. This led us to analyze or explore a series of examples like prototype including living organisms like worms, bees, slime molds, windows with living sunscreen system, perfectly integrated in architecture in a symbiotic way. We also have in the Italian pavilion air exchange and conditioning systems done with vegetation. We have also have columns, structural columns of buildings done with microplastic recycled from, collected from the ocean. In a way, we have used a definition coming from, as I said before, biology, in this case from genetics, of Johan Birney, the first the leader of the ENCODE group who was able to understand the sequence of human genome, and we use their definition. So the city could be like a jungle full of strange creatures. And this is what we have been trying to do with the Italian pavilion.
Thank you so much. I do want to thank our panelists for sharing their insights and experiences with us today. And I want to invite our audience to thanking our panelists as well. And I hope it's been a learning experience for you all too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.